Algeth'ar Academy, a historical training ground for heroes. Fitting that it's working itself into the first dungeon pool of Dragonflight Season 1. Last week, this dungeon was open for mythic testing, and I wanted to spend some time talking about my first impressions of the dungeon, doing a quick overview of the mobs, the layout, the bosses, and overall aesthetic of the instance. Let's dive in. From the Arcane Walkway, to the Skyward Islands, to the Overgrown Grove, this dungeon is an absolute beauty. Let's be honest, the art team usually carries Blizzard, and Algeth'ar Academy is definitely the perfect display of that. While this dungeon looks amazing, I do have to say I'm also a massive fan of the layout as well. Upon entering the instance, you'll Halo 3 launch yourself down towards the Academy courtyard to find yourself amongst the 5 Dragonflights and their representatives. Here you'll choose your desired blessing from your preferred Dragonflight. The Bronze Dragonflight grants the player 5% haste, the Black Dragonflight grants 5% crit, the Blue Dragonflight will give roughly 600 points of mastery, the Red Dragonflight will give 5% verse, and the Green Dragonflight will increase the healing that you receive by 10%. I've always enjoyed having powerful buffs from dungeons like this. There are a lot of different possibilities with these, especially with the new talent trees. While most players will lean towards their favorite stat, knowing which stat you're going to be taking may actually open up your talent options and playstyle. This isn't even the best part of the instance. One thing that I personally always enjoyed in Mythic Plus is flexible dungeon routing. Algeth'ar offers the option to pick and choose which area your group wants to progress, and because of this, it's extremely satisfying for players who want to optimize their cooldowns and lust timings. There is always an argument that linear dungeons are better for casuals, pugs, or new players, and I totally get that sentiment. Here is what's super nice about Algeth'ar Academy though. There isn't much more than 100% count, so once you pick which way you want to traverse through the dungeon, you can hold W and not stress anything about it. Either way you decide to progress through the dungeon though, there are a lot of opportunities for larger pools, which makes DPS and tanks extremely hoardy to pad the meters. Alright, with that out of the way, let's quickly walk through this instance and break down some of the more important mobs and damage profiles. In this case, we are heading towards Vexamus, the technical first boss of the instance. Before you get there, you'll have to face off against a few different foes, including enchanted weapons, arcane elementals, and mana worms. Some of the scarier mobs to tank in this area are actually going to be the arcane weapons, specifically the spellbound battle axes. They apply a nasty debuff to the tank. Outside of some general cast though from the mana fiends, these pulls are pretty lightweight. Approaching the boss arena though, you'll need to deal with some more mana fiends alongside some of the unruly textbooks, which have an extremely fitting cast called Monotonous Lecture, which will put players to sleep during the channel. Make sure you're interrupting these at all costs. Once the library is cleared, you'll actually engage with Vexamus, a very nostalgic boss. For those who spent any time in Upper Karazhan this last season, this boss will remind you of the Mana Devourer. This fight is pretty straightforward. Soak orbs, dodge frontals, and place your debuff drops in an adequate location. I will be doing deep dive boss guides in the future, so if that's something you're interested in, feel free to subscribe. It's free after all. This fight has a nice ebb and flow to it. While there are some visual bugs and tuning that needs to be adjusted, this fight is incredibly satisfying. Proceeding onwards, you'll need to clear some of the similar trash mobs all the way up until you find yourself face to face with the Guardian Sentry. I've never been a fan of mini-boss guardians like this. This is probably my least favorite part of the dungeon. There are some bugs with how quickly his tornadoes spawn, at least it feels like a bug. They seem to spawn almost instantly, and if you're caught in one, you'll get stunned for a few seconds and take a bit of damage. He will also cast an insane knockback cast, and as you can tell, might result in a long fall off the spire. I found that pulling him up towards one of the pillars is the play, since tanks can actually just get launched into the wall, and the actual knockback can actually be line of sighted, meaning you don't have to actually run out. Let's see if they fix that though. After the sentry falls, you can go one of two ways. To prevent backtracking, let's head to Crawth next. On this platform, there are 3 trash pulls, which will spawn after the previous set dies. I guess the single target sentry pull isn't the only thing I dislike. I'm not a big fan of RP style mob spawns like this. Luckily, the pulls are pretty sizable, so it's pretty easy just to cleave these birds down. After all 3 waves have been defeated, you'll see 3 orb spawns. This is introducing you to the boss fight mechanic. You'll spawn the boss by throwing 3 of the orbs through these Quidditch type rings. Once Crawth spawns, it's go time. The boss is a general tank buster accompanied with a silencing AoE, and it's important that your melee or ranged aren't stacked, since this mechanic works similar to quaking, that in being stacked with another party member can pretty much cause death. Shortly into the fight, more orbs will spawn, along with 2 goals, the goal of the Searing Blaze and goal of Rushing Wind. After you score 3 goals, you're going to gain like a Kiss Curse effect. The Searing Blaze will cause the goal to erupt in flames, which will stun Crawth and make her take 75% more damage for 12 seconds. The downside is that the flame swirls will spawn and erupt throughout the rest of the encounter. This is more fine for melee, but can make the caster life a little obnoxious. On the contrary, the Goal of Rushing Winds will spawn motes, which grants 45% haste and movement speed for 20 seconds, and makes you immune to pushback. Players who don't hold the orb will be pushed towards the edge of the arena. There will also be cyclones moving around the arena as well after activating the Goal of Rushing Winds. This is a really enjoyable boss because you can really optimize burn windows and save a lot of time if you want. Another strat that groups have been abusing is if you don't score any goals, there are no mechanics. So while you will miss out on, a haste buff and a damage amplifier, you'll have less things to deal with. So this fight is pretty engaging. Alright, onward to the Botanica. Here you'll find patrolling aggravated skitterflies, as well as vile and hungry lashers. The patrols are not only annoying, but are extremely deadly once they begin to enrage and then they leap onto random members of your group. These will typically be the priority if you ever happen to pull them. Once all 3 sets of lashers are cleared, you will then be able to engage with the Overgrown Ancient. And oh buddy, let me tell you, this boss is an AoE pad lord dream. The Overgrown Ancient will spawn massive waves of lashers as well as a large mob called an Ancient Branch that will attempt to heal. The whole premise of this fight is add spawn control, both with proper placement, baiting, and of course, big damage. This has got to be one of my favorite fights so far in Mythic Plus going into Dragonflight. After the Overgrown Ancient falls, we are then going to head up towards the Head Teacher's Enclave to face off against the Echo of Doragosa. But before reaching her, we will need to fight some of the security, educators, and enforcers. These mobs tend to deal a fair bit of group damage, but that could just be a tuning issue. Doragosa is a very unique boss, and what I mean by that is it's extremely punishing the more your group messes up. The core theme of this fight is that whenever you get hit by a mechanic, both avoidable or targeted, you'll gain a stack of overwhelming power. While this does grant you increased damage, it will also create void zones upon hitting 3 stacks, which has a natural domino effect. In that, will cause there to be more mechanics, which in turn causes there a higher chance to gain stacks, which increases the chance for more pools to spawn, so on and so forth. I like the idea of a Kiss Curse effect and a controlled damage amplifier, but this fight has the potential to get out of hand pretty quickly. Once Doragosa goes down, you have completed all of your training within the Academy. Overall, pretty fun dungeon, and one that I'm definitely looking forward to in Dragonflight. I rate this dungeon 13 aggravated skitterflies out of 2 monotonous lectures.